Hey YouTube, let's talk about this Peruvian tank rack build that I'm trying to do to get ready for Peru. Now I have a 55 gallon, an old 55 gallon, and you have seen before that it is in not the best of shape. It's got water scale, rust, and in truth, I don't really trust the seams on it. Now, we are going to try, per several different people's recommendation, Barkeep's Friend. And I have the liquid version. And I've always been a proponent of not putting chemicals into your tanks, even for cleaning purposes. But this tank is so scaled up and so full of rust, and this tank needs to be completely resealed. This tank is about 35 years old. You can't really see, but on the very end down there is the marker for the tank, and it is a Odell. And Odell is a pretty famous maker. They've made a lot of different fish tanks over the years, and they've always been known for their sturdy construction and their long-lasting ability. Odell is the name. It's a like an angelfish looking. Sorry about the lighting in here. It's not the best quality, but I did want to talk about a little bit about what it is that I'm going to try to do here. I am setting this 55 gallon tank up to house fish that I bring back from Peru. Now, I'm dealing with some issues that that have to do with the amount of space that I have available in my room where the fish are going to go. That's a little better. And as you can see, I have bought Soft Cleanse, Barkeep's Friend. It's a liquid version. I'm trying to focus this a little bit. It's fighting me. Okay, so I'm dealing with a couple of issues. One is space, the amount of space that I have available in the room where I'm going to put these fish. I've got a corner that's basically unused or not effectively used right now, and I am going to try to build a rack that fits the corner of this room and allows me to have this 55 gallon, a sump underneath it, and I'm probably going to be using a plastic tote bin type of setup to run my sump out of. And I also want to be able to set my 20 gallon shrimp tank and a couple of the other smaller tanks that I have up on top. So I need to build a 3-tiered rack which will house this 55, house the sump for the 55, and also carry 2 or 3 20 gallons and some 5s that I have. Now, the original rack that this tank was on was one of these old pulp board racks. You can kind of see it in the distance. It was basically just a setup that allowed the tank to sit on top and gave you a storage shelf on the bottom. So if you pay attention, you can see that there is a sheet of 3/4 deck plywood that is made to tongue and groove lap. So it's got a groove on this side, and it's got a tongue on the other side that will allow the tongue to slip into this groove on this side of the next sheet. So you put this down, nail it, and then slip the next sheet in with the tongue on the other side into the groove on this side. And that's how you end up with a very solid base, deck, roof, whatever you happen to be trying to create. So I'm dealing with a 54-inch length that I can function with. Now this tank is, with the plastic on the bottom, is about 4 foot and 3/8. So I need the space of 4 foot 3/8. The old stand, which has a lip on the top of it, is exactly 4 foot and 3/8 from lip to lip. So it's slightly longer than 4 foot. And if I'm going to build this stand out of this piece of plywood, I need to come up with a way to use the 4 foot length from side to side on a piece of plywood as my base, and then cut at least 2 bases for the shelves, and then I need to come up with stand sides for the other, out of the rest of the piece. So basically the dimensions are 13 inches deep. So I will need to come up with 2 13-inch pieces, which is 26 inches, 26 and an 1/8 inch. You got to take an 1/8 off for a saw blade width when you cut. So at 26 inches, that will allow me about 70 inches high. That will include the 55-gallon tank, the base, which will hold the sump, the base shelf, and then a top shelf that's a little over 5 foot tall. Now 5 foot is going to be difficult for me to actually service the tanks that sit on top, or to see the tanks that sit on top well. So basically we're talking I should have enough room to get 2 sides and whatever front pieces that I might need out of the long piece of this piece of plywood that will be left. Now this plywood is not treated for water, so it is not designed to get wet all the time. So I will be using Quick 15 or some kind of marine spar varnish to seal this wood and indeed the whole rack. Now usually when we build in construction, when we build something that is designed to hold the amount of weight that this piece, this stand will be required to hold, we use something along the lines of a 2x6. And a 2x6 is basically, before being planed down, an inch and a half thick and they're about 6 inches wide. This is a piece of wood that is structural enough to hold a great deal of weight. But I have a couple of issues this time that I'm going to be dealing with that are not normal in the construction of a rack and tank setup. I need to be very careful because this rack will be on the north wall, and my old house does not have a great deal of insulation. In fact, basically it is lath and plaster, 2x4s, and the 2 layers of siding, wood and aluminum, that are on the outside of the house. There's basically no real insulation in this house. It was built in the early 1900s, and they didn't really use insulation that much. So I am dealing with a situation where the amount of heat that I'm going to be able to provide regularly to this entire setup, as it is standing against a north-facing wall, receiving the brunt of the cold air that comes in December and January, it will cause this tank to be cold. It will cause this rack to be cold. So instead of using 2x6 structural wood, which is normally what we use to build something that's going to hold this kind of weight, I need to come up with a way to build it out of less heavy structural wood so that I am able to insulate it better. Now, when you're dealing with insulation, this is one of the ways that you can get by insulating a small space, and in this case it's 3/4 of an inch thick, and it's R4. Now, most of the time in walls and in ceilings, you want anything from R15 to R20 insulation. But in this case, I've only got so much space that I can use, and so I am going to try to build a rack that is both structurally solid enough and enables me to insulate it heavily enough that it will form its own enclosed, insulated space. Obviously, you can see the Pink Panther, which will tell you what kind of insulation that actually is. So, in effect, I am going to build a rack out of this 3/4 inch decking plywood that also allows me to insulate the inside of it. And for that, I am probably, and I have not gotten this all worked out yet, but I am probably going to be using material for the structural side of this tank that is like this. It's not a 2x4, it's a 1x2. It's an inch thick and it's 2 inches wide, so that I can build a rack from this material deck it on the outside. The exterior of it will be this 3/4 plywood. It will then have this material used as structural parts. So I'm going to need to have, basically I'm going to build a rack out of this stuff, and I'm going to skin it with material, with the 3/4, and shelve it with the 3/4. And then between my structural members, I will use the 3/4 inch insulation to further insulate this material. And when I am then done, I will form the inside of what you will see looking at the tank and around the tank out of this 1/4 inch flooring, which is notch and groove. It's basically got grooves and notches so that it locks together. And it is insulated by cork board on the back side, and it is a very hard composite material. It looks like wood, you know, from just basic looking, it looks like wood, but it's not wood. But I will line the interior of this piece so that basically you will have 3/4 plywood, decking plywood, 1x2 members that form the rack itself, the material that the tank will actually rest on, that will hold the weight of the tank. And I'm going to have to come up with some structural tricks that will allow this material to hold the weight of the tank. It will require extra amounts of these structural members, and they will have to be joined to the plywood in such a solid way that they literally become part of, that the two things added together equal more than what each one individually is able to support weight-wise. I'm going to have to come up with some kind of method to go from end to end, from the tank end to the tank end, through my decking and my stuff, so that it will aid the structural strength and the weight that it can hold, with like threaded bar that will pass all the way through and tie it all together and add structural strength to the actual load-bearing platform that the tank will sit on. It's possible to do like Corey did in his store and come up with a bottomless, platformless way to hold the tank literally on each end. The tank sitting on structural wood on each end. But in this case, I need the platform to aid in isolating the area that this tank will be in from the air in the room, from the coldness of the lath and plaster wall behind it. I'm going for insulation as much as I'm going for structural strength. And to do that, I'm going to have to use some tricks. It's not rocket science. You can figure the structural strength of a piece of wood based on its the wood that is used to compose it, based on the joining methods that you use, based on how the structure supports and transmits the weight into the structure around it. There are lots of potential ways to create something out of lesser material, i.e. not as heavy a material as a 2x6,